From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The federal judge handling the federal indictment against former President Donald Trump on conspiracy charges to overturn the 2020 election sets a trial date of March 4, 2024. That just happens to be the day before Super Tuesday primaries, when 16 states and territories go to the polls to vote over who to nominate for the Republican presidential nomination. What does that date tell us about how this court case will affect the nominating process? And in the wake of the GOP presidential debate, the conventional wisdom is that Donald Trump won it, even though he didn't participate. That's what the Trump campaign and the Beltway press corps says. But a new poll shows a bump for Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, and a decline of a few points for Donald Trump. We'll parse the results of the polling. Welcome, I'm Paul As You Go, and as Labor Day approaches, we want to talk about where the presidential nominating fight stands in both political parties as we get into the fall. I'm Paul As You Go with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. And we start with the news, which is that Judge Tanya Chutkan sets the date of March 4th for the start of Donald Trump's trial in the federal conspiracy case. Trump had wanted it delayed until 2026. Jack Smith, the special counsel, wanted it in January on the cusp of the Iowa caucuses. The judge sets March 4th. Kim, I mean, what do you make of the timing of this, and what impact will it have?
Well, I guess if you were the Trump campaign, you could say, well, at least it's not right before Iowa. Instead, it's before Super Tuesday. So I don't think this is a win any way you look at it for the Trump campaign. But this highlights what was always going to be a problem for him the minute that these indictments rolled. I would note that it says something that even as Judge Tanya Chutkan was making this decision, this very consequential decision about timing, there was a simultaneous hearing going on. There is today in Atlanta to deal with the charges of conspiracy and racketeering charges that were brought by Fulton County prosecutor Fannie Willis. This case dealing with a request from one of the defendants, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, about his move to remove his case to federal court. And you start to look down the list of all the hearings that have already been laid out there. And remember here, we don't just have 4 criminal trials with 91 different indictments, but we've got a whole bunch of civil trials as well, too, that are ongoing as well. And you start to look at the dates, and I don't know how Donald Trump is actually going to find time to show up on the campaign trail if he is also expected to sit in some of these hearings.
Just to elaborate on that, the case in New York State for paying hush money to Stormy Daniels, that is scheduled for March. And right now, the case in federal court in Florida for the mishandling of documents is scheduled for May, Kyle, if I have those dates correct. Now, none of these dates are necessarily set in stone, because there will be motions by Donald Trump's lawyers and lawyers in the Georgia case for other defendants to not only move the venue, but also claims that are likely to be appealed. For example, a very big one is immunity, absolute immunity, whether the president has absolute immunity for actions that are a part of his duties as president. There'll be a big debate in court over whether what Trump did was related to his presidential duties. But it's a serious question, a serious legal question that could go to the Supreme Court, and that could delay the federal case now scheduled for March 4th in particular.
It is possible to imagine some delays in these dates, but I do agree with Kim that the judge having penciled in March 4th here is a pretty big political moment, because it gives other Republicans who are challenging Donald Trump, I think, a strong argument they can make to voters who like Donald Trump, who think that Donald Trump is the victim of a witch hunt. They can say, listen, whether you think that or not, we can't nominate a guy who is going to be spending the week of Super Tuesday in a trial. It could be days or weeks. He's going to be off the campaign trail. And that's just one of these cases, remember. And some of these Republicans have been reluctant to take Donald Trump on the substance. The chief exception there is Chris Christie. You saw him do that strongly at the debate last week. But here's a chance that they can make an argument, almost a process argument, that if the Republican Party wants to win and it wants to beat Joe Biden, this is not the way to start that, to go into this 2024 primary campaign with a guy who's going to be stuck in courtrooms, because unlike a civil trial, the defendant in a criminal case does not have the option not to show up. You have to be there.
Well, but on the other hand, doesn't this make Trump's argument that if you are inclined to think this is a political prosecution, here you are. And so far, we haven't seen this really affect his polling numbers too much. And I mean, this makes particularly the March 4th date, just to give listeners some context, the Iowa caucuses are scheduled for January 15th now. New Hampshire is tentatively set for January 23rd. That could change because New Hampshire does sometimes shift the date. February 8th is Nevada caucuses, and February 24th is the South Carolina primary, which is a big date. February 27th, tentatively, the Michigan vote. And then March 5th is Super Tuesday, 16 states voting at that time. This makes the trial and the looking backward the central focus, Kim, of what the primaries are all about. They won't be talking about Biden. They'll be talking about Trump.
Yep. And Trump will dominate the airwaves. I mean, we know this. It's funny, despite all of the hand-wringing that all of these media executives had after 2016. How much did our focus and airtime of Trump help win him the presidency? We're doing it all over again. I can promise you that every one of these trial dates, it will be wall-to-wall coverage. Every pre-hearing, every little in and out of the civil cases as well, it will be all Trump all the time. And Donald Trump, we saw how he can also capitalize on this. We saw his monetizing of his mugshot from last week. And no one should doubt, by the way, that his decision to, in fact, surrender himself in the Georgia case the day after the first Republican debate was deliberate, because he wanted to draw the attention away from that debate and to himself again. So I agree with Kyle. There's going to be some real logistical issues here. But I do think that overall, if you're Donald Trump and you're making the case that this is a political prosecution, that you are being attacked, and that Republican voters have an obligation, therefore, to support you, these cases couldn't be lining up better for him.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, Kyle. I mean, I don't know how this will play politically, particularly at the trial stage. If there's a result one way or another, conviction or acquittal or hung jury, then I think it's clear to see what the impact might be. But at the trial stage, when now we know these votes will be taking place, I think a lot of Republican voters are inclined to say, well, look, we're going to support Trump just to stick it to the man, just to say, Democrats, you can't get away with this. I think there's a real danger that this could be the case.
Maybe, but I think that's why it's incumbent on other Republicans to make the argument that even if you think this is a political prosecution, the right response is not to nominate a candidate who cannot beat Joe Biden in November. That would be their argument. If you want to restore impartial justice at the Justice Department, you need to nominate a Republican who can win. I think that argument could have some salience with these voters. I mean, I do think that once the federal prosecutors, Jack Smith, the special counsel, decided to go down this road, it puts the judge in a really tight position, because if she had scheduled the trial any earlier than this, you would have heard complaints from President Trump that this was a rush to convict him, that they didn't have the time to look at the documents they needed and prepare a defense. According to the news articles this morning, she responded to some of those claims, saying, for example, that discovery these days does not look like going to a warehouse and individually paging through boxes of documents. A lot of it is electronic, and that Trump's defense has known that the special counsel has been investigating this behavior for a while, so they've had some time to get their ducks in a row. On the other hand, if she had gone any later than this, remember Trump asked for a trial in 2026. How can you schedule a trial in 2026 if he intends to be the president of the United States in 2026?
Well, you can do that because you don't want to influence the presidential election. That's why. That's an argument in the favor of delaying the trial to 2025, which I think might still happen in this case, depending on what the interlocutory motions, interlocutory meaning motions that could affect the trial itself, and the absolute immunity could be one of those.